So, today I want to talk about evictions. There are far too many Americans on the cusp of eviction in the United States right now, and we are currently at a position where the federal moratorium on evictions is scheduled to end on December 31st, 2020. There seems to be no effort from government to actually extend this moratorium at this time. And so I wanted to take a look at some of the statistical data around just how many Americans will be affected by this, and then discuss what the impact of eviction looks like for the average American. What is the process going through it, and what are long-term effects? And then I wanted to talk about some non-governmental solutions, especially given that it doesn't seem like the government is interested, at least federally, in actually resolving this issue. With that said, let's take a look at some of the statistical data. The United States Census Bureau has put out a infographic about the likelihood of eviction or foreclosure. This is talking about the percentage of adults living in households not current on rent or mortgage, where eviction or foreclosure in the next 2 months is either very likely or somewhat likely. And these statistics do not look good. Anything in the dark green on this map is we're talking about percentages over 46.4% of renters. We're looking at, in New Mexico, 49.4%, Oregon, 52.4%, Wyoming, 49.2%, South Dakota, 59.4%, Georgia, 52.7%, South Carolina, 54%, Ohio, 48%. And even in very high populous states like California, which is at 34.5%, and Texas, which is at 35.6%, those represent very large amounts of Americans. So right here we have the statistic on the different states, many of which I've already mentioned, and we can also look at this by metro areas. So if you live in the areas of Atlanta, Phoenix, Boston, Houston, Riverside, California, Detroit, Washington, Chicago, Dallas, or Philadelphia, you are in an area that is very likely, as of current statistics, which is week 20, according to the US Census, which is represented by the dates of November 25th to December 7th. So that is the current statistical analysis on areas that are very strongly affected by the potential of evictions in the United States right now. And when we look at the country as a whole, there are approximately 250 million adults over the age of 18, of which about 19 million are renters. And of those, 6,727,406, 35.3% of all renters, are likely to be removed from their homes in the coming months. These are people who are 2 months away from losing their homes. And there's another important statistic out there, that approximately 12% of people who get evicted, historically, will end up homeless. That means that if we approximate 6.7 million, and we multiply that by 12%, we get 804,000 Americans that might become homeless, in addition to everyone else losing their homes. And we already have a homelessness crisis in the United States right now. For the entire country, we are still in a pandemic, it is still wintertime, and we are talking about adding 800,000 homeless adults. That's not including children. Never mind the fact that the remaining portion of that 6.7 million people will be moving into more crowded spaces with family. Some will find temporary housing in motels, and some will have to find other forms of temporary shelter. This is a massive displacement of American peoples. This is not going to be a good look for the United States as a country, and certainly not for the economy, and any sort of hope that we might get out of this situation unscathed. And again, this is during winter, during a pandemic. This does not look good and will probably mean a lot of lives. But ignoring the COVID situation, what does actually getting evicted look like? Well, the first thing is you have to be taken to court. And oftentimes, if you're in a situation where you can't afford rent, you can't afford a lawyer. And in many places, a lawyer is not required. Like if you get a criminal charge, you all have the right to an attorney. But if you're being evicted from your home, you do not have that same right to an attorney in most places. So in many cases, you're going to be facing your landlord in court while they have a lawyer and you don't, and you're going to be defending yourself. Further, once that judgment comes against you, because it's very likely to do so, you are now given a small window of opportunity in order to leave your home. Often it's somewhere in the range of days, maybe a week if you've gotten a very friendly judge. And when that happens, you are now in a situation where you need to find housing within a week's time. Now, more than likely, you would have already had some level of notice that you might be evicted because they have to, serve you the court order and all that stuff. And that's, of course, assuming that you can take off for court for your job or take off for court because you have kids to take care of. There's a lot of factors that come into play that are not often taken into consideration. But once this judgment is passed against you and you have to move out of your space, these judgments, while they don't directly affect your credit score, can make it harder in the future when you have a judgment against you and it's public record to rent again. Meaning that you are less likely for a great number of years to be able to reach a point where you can actually rent another space. And I don't know if there'll be more allowances made by landlords that might be a little bit more understanding for people who lost their homes during COVID. But in my experience with landlords, that's probably not going to be the case in a good number of cases. Furthermore, any rent that you still back owed is going to be put against your credit score. So unless you pay that back immediately, which you probably don't have money for, because if you did, you wouldn't be evicted, that is going to affect your ability to get loans and to take out credit cards, which means your credit is shot for the foreseeable future. And this is just from the financial aspect. So you are now in a place where renting is harder, where getting any sort of credit is harder, and you're living in a tight space, probably with family members during a pandemic, during the winter. Assuming you're not one of the 800,000 who's likely to end up homeless. Also, many people might have children involved that they need to feed. So what does this look like and how does this impact the average person? Well, housing instability ends up leading to a lot of psychological issues. There's a ton of evidence to show that it leads to higher rates of anxiety, depression, substance abuse, and suicide. There's also a higher risk of people needing to use the emergency room, according to some studies by NYU. There's also, because you have difficulty finding a new space to rent, you are more likely to end up in locations where poverty rates are already higher, where there might be more ability for you to get access to certain types of housing. So now you're in a higher poverty area, which in a lot of cases ends up being a higher crime area. So that means that that's going to add and compound to anxiety, depression, etc. Furthermore, because of all this, it seems that physical health and respiratory disease and chronic illnesses tend to form more. And children who have gone through these processes tend to perform worse in school and tend to develop long-term chronic health problems, both emotionally and physically. Eviction is not a good place to be in. Furthermore, all of these statistics are usually compounded and affected even greater in Black and Latino communities. So as we've been talking about this past year, systemic racism through the BLM movement, we're going to see that multiplied many times over. This is a very scary position for this country to be in right now. This is a very scary position for a good number of Americans to be facing all of these realities. And oftentimes, if you don't have access to housing or an address, you can't get access to certain public services either. It's very hard to get access to any sort of government assistance, let alone a job, let alone maintaining other aspects of life. This is what this means for almost 7 million Americans over the next 2 months if this moratorium is not extended and if things are not dealt with. And that's, again, not even counting the fact that there are a ton of people who are still behind on their rent. Even if they're not evicted right away, this is just compounding and compounding. And if you think these numbers are not going to shoot up and over the coming months, they are. This is going to get worse before it gets better. Even with the vaccine coming out, even if things start to reopen, this is going to get a lot worse before it gets better. Because all that back rent is still due. And all that debt is going to add up. So what are solutions that we can take besides appealing to government? Because right now, again, appealing to government doesn't seem to be doing much. And I do advocate that we appeal to our local senators and we appeal to, anybody that we can get any access to, right? Try, because that's one option on the table, despite the fact that it seems to be doing very little. And I'm going to be real, there's something I just need to call out just for my own sanity. Kentucky is at 39.7%. Fix your senators. Because right now, Rand Paul and Mitch McConnell are two of the people who are causing the most devastation when it comes to stimulus. Mitch McConnell has been hardballing Nancy Pelosi for months, preventing her from getting an actual stimulus out to people. And Rand Paul doesn't even believe that we should be having stimulus. So seriously, Kentucky, it's in your best interest right now. Please fix your senator situation. Because while the Democrats have their own set of problems and aren't fixing a lot of things, the Republicans are making it a lot worse. So what can people do? Well, one of the things to appeal to is having a tenant union, tenant association, or tenant group fight evictions. Basically, there's a case that happened earlier this year when a local landlord removed a resident's belongings and changed the locks on his apartment a week after he missed rent. This organizer in the LA Tenant Union put out a call to a network of supporters. Soon after, more than 30 tenant organizers arrived at the address and physically blocking a moving van loaded with tenants' belongings. They linked arms to keep the van from pulling from the driveway. Others formed a blockade around the back entry to the apartment building, where a contractor got to work. In 5 minutes, removed the lock, opened the door, and organizers rapidly moved the belongings back in. Contact your neighbors. Talk to them. Find out if there's a tenant union in your area. Find out if there's any sort of local tenant association that can help you in your situation or give you tools and information to try to heal and rectify what's going on. The point is when people band together, it becomes a lot more difficult for tenants to be evicted, even with the court order. And in many cases, police have shown up and will show up even before the court orders the eviction if it's been a long-term process. A lot of times these things can be illegally done. And one of the things that I want to call out is the following. Physically getting evicted tenants back in their homes is a key strategic play, argued Trinidad Ruiz, a member of the LATU. If you don't have possession of the home going into court, you lose because you're already evicted, he said. Keep your neighbors in their homes. Band together. These numbers are very high. And I'm going to be real with you. People who rent are usually all renters in a community. It's very rare that you have a bunch of homeowners and renters intermixed with each other. Not to say it doesn't happen, but there are in the majority of cases, you either have a large number of homeowners and a large number of renters in population together. if you catch what I'm saying. So talk to your neighbors, see what their financial situations are. And the fact that it's 35% of people across the country, in some areas upwards of 50%, there is a chance that if one of your neighbors isn't experiencing this directly, another one is. Find them. Talk about your information. Start sharing and connecting. Form a union. Make sure when the cops show up, you're ready. Fight them back. Tell them that this is wrong. And wear your mask while you're doing it. This is one of the only things that we have. Go protest in front of the courts. Prevent people from getting access into the buildings. That's another thing they advocate for. For example, dozens of court workers, attorneys, and others were physically blocked from entering the building as the crowd cried out, shut it down, and housing is healthcare. Unable to open the courthouse, had to reschedule not only evictions, but other proceedings as well, according to a representative from New Orleans City Court. There are forms of direct action that can be taken that will slow the process, that will make it better for your neighbors. There's only so much people can do to try to rip people from their homes. When everybody bands together and forms a community organization, we find that this works. And again, there are already organizations in play in many places. There are also virtual eviction defense workshops one could look for. Try to find those online. I know New York had one recently with AOC. You need to start looking at these things if you're in this position or you know somebody in this position. And even if you're not the person being evicted, you might be in the coming months. You might be someone on the cusp of you losing your home soon enough. So take that effort and defend your neighbors, and hopefully they'll defend you also. With that said, if you like this video, give me a thumbs up, hit the subscribe button and the bell for notifications. You can follow me on Twitter and check out my Discord in the description down below. And with that said, my name is Anarchist Tara, and I hope you enjoyed watching.